What I miss the most, and the huge loss for most people in the Palisades, is that it was a very tight-knit community. I mean, I didn't have to rebuild. I sat down and tried to think of other places where I might want to buy a house instead. Honest to God, I couldn't think of any place else. I'm not ready to give up yet. My name is Sue Kohl. I have lived in the Palisades for about 35 years, raised 5 kids there, and 2 stepkids also. For about the past 13, 14 years, I've been on the Pacific Palisades Community Council. I am the president now. The chairman/president job has been seriously altered from what it usually is, as opposed to just running meetings and writing some letters. It consists of pretty much 5 days a week meetings. There's just a lot of work to do, helping to hold the community together. The day of the fire, we had all been warned for a few days that there were going to be severe winds, which is always scary in the Palisades. We've evacuated before. We've always come back after a couple days, which is, I believe, why most people I know, including myself, took nothing. But that day, I was at an office meeting. My daughter's my partner. We were there together, and she went out at about 10:40 to get us some coffee. She was going to go to Starbucks, and she turned around and came back and said, "No coffee." She says, "Look up there." And sure enough, you could look up, and you could tell that fire, which started in the Highlands, wasn't in the Highlands anymore. From our office in the middle of town, you could see a lot of flames and a lot of smoke. We went home. I banged and banged on my neighbor's door to wake her up, to say, we need to get out. So basically, we loaded up the dogs, everything the dogs could need, and I did take family photo albums, nothing else. And we got on the road. In hindsight, I would have stayed a bit longer and thought a bit more about things that I needed or wanted to take. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that there isn't a trigger. Someone will ask about something, or you'll think, oh, I need to get this, and then you remember, oh, yeah, that's right, I don't have that. The letters that my kids wrote from camp when they were young, and all the little things they made in school out of clay, all of which I kept. People ask you your address, your zip code, and you have to think for a second. And those moments, are difficult. So the vast majority of my friends all moved to apartments in the marina. A lot of them meet once a week at a restaurant called Dear Jane's. We all stay in touch as much as we possibly can. Everybody misses everybody. So we're all trying. It was a happy, special place. You were surrounded by friends. Everybody had a lot of support. It's the kind of town, all of the Palisades really, where you run into everybody all day long. At the market, on the street. We're all desperately trying to stay together now over WhatsApp and text messaging. But that day-to-day going out your front door and not being able to see your friend from 3 doors down, or frankly, even some of the people that maybe weren't your friends, they were just your neighbors, they were your people, they were your community, and everybody is so scattered now, and it's kind of sad. Some of the neighbors, of course, are just sort of paralyzed. They don't know what to do. They're sort of in a wait and see. They want to wait and see, is it going to be back in 2 years, 3 years, or is it going to be 6 or 7 years? Are they financially able to do it? Is that really how they want to spend the next couple of years, dealing with building? So a lot of people are just paralyzed. But we do need things to be built a little bit differently. We're all going to have to think a lot more about home hardening, building with better materials, keeping vegetation away from homes. That's going to be on everybody's mind. 40, 50, 60 years ago, I don't think people were too worried about natural disasters. Things are different now. Everybody wants to know how it's going to be. But in terms of what's going on with the entire infrastructure of the town, nobody yet has told me this is our plan. This is what's going to make it happen in the fastest way and the most secure way. I haven't heard that. And that's what we're all really anxious to hear, you know? And nobody knows how it's going to be, but we just all have to say, I hope it's great. I hope it's great like it used to be. I just think people, they need to know that their friends and neighbors, not 100%, but a lot of them will be coming back and will still be their friends and their neighbors and will be walking down the street and waving at them as they go by. I think if people really believe that it can be pretty much like it was before, in terms of the very tight community atmosphere that we've always had, I think it'll give them the confidence to come back. That's my biggest hope, because I want everybody to come back, you know?
As hurricane-force winds pushed embers across the Palisades on January 7th, worried Southern Californians, we clutched our phones and turned on the local news, watching images of multi-million-dollar homes in flames, residents fighting the flames with garden hoses, celebrities fleeing. The images were stunning, and yet they weren't new. History was repeating itself. From LA Times Studios, this is Rebuilding LA. I'm Kate Kegel. As we began preparing for this podcast, it became clear that for us to understand where we could go from here as Los Angeles rebuilds, we need to understand where we are coming from and some of the inherent challenges that exist for these neighborhoods and many others in Southern California. So today, we're going to go back a few decades to 1961.
You are not urged but warned to stay completely out of this area. The roads and the thoroughfares must be kept open for firefighting and emergency equipment. Any sight or spectators attempting to get into this area will be arrested immediately, no questions asked.
That's live footage of the Bel-Air Fire, courtesy of KTLA and CAL FIRE. That fire started in a trash heap on a dry November morning in that steep canyon neighborhood as the Santa Ana winds blew, carrying thousands of tiny embers with it. Ultimately, the fire burned more than 6,000 acres and destroyed about 500 homes, many belonging to Hollywood celebrities. Even former Vice President Richard Nixon fought the flames that day. It was considered a firefighting success, according to a history by the LA Fire Department, because most of the homes in the fire's path were saved and everyone survived. But the devastation underscored the perils of living in the hills of Southern California.
This place is built to burn in a lot of ways, some of which is ecological.
That's Char Miller. He's the W.M. Keck Professor of Environmental Analysis and History at Pomona College. We're going to talk to him during the second half of this episode. But first, we're going to start with Jenny Jarvie. She's a national correspondent for the Los Angeles Times and wrote about the history of development in Los Angeles into the hillsides. She joins us now from her home. Thank you so much, Jenny, for making time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So you were not very familiar with this history when this assignment landed in your lap. Tell us about all the research you did into how Los Angeles came to be.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in LA, so and I didn't know much about the Bel-Air Fire, but I love digging into history, and I started poring over newspaper clippings, working with some of our researchers, and just spent a long time going through old records. And really, it's the story of how people came to live in LA's hills is kind of an epic, almost kind of infuriating tale of like human ambition and human folly. The Bel-Air Fire is kind of a landmark event in LA history. I think partly because it was televised, and so people around the world saw it, but also because you had just this huge spectacle of Kim Novak and Richard Nixon, who lived in LA at the time, hosing down their roofs. You had Zsa Zsa Gabor wearing kitten heels and a string of pearls, kind of clutching a shovel and digging through the rubble of her home. So if the fire was something that just really caught the public imagination.
The LA Fire Department actually made a documentary about the Bel-Air Fire a year later in 1962. It's called Design for Disaster, and it's all about the challenges of fighting these fires in the hillsides where so many people live. Let's listen to a clip.
Fire has jumped Mulholland at the crest of the Santa Monicas, headed toward Bel-Air. To these men, brush fires are routine, but this one is pushing them hard. The flames take a run along the canyon slopes, heading uphill toward the ridges. Firemen with high-pressure hose streams knock the fire down as it tries to make the jump as it did over Mulholland. But in the canyon between, along the wide sweep of fire front traveling unchecked with the wind, there lies the problem.
Jenny, can you talk a little bit about how the scene unfolded that day and how the fire spread so quickly?
Yeah, it was a really hot, dry morning in November, and the fire started in a trash pile north of Mulholland Drive, and then it kind of swept up across the canyons. When it got to Bel-Air, it started to set the wood shingles, the roof shingles on fire, and the thermal heat from that, it just basically lifted these burning shingles up really high up into the air, and then winds, very powerful winds, high as 50 miles per hour, started hurling those burning shingles more than a mile away as far as Brentwood. So you basically had spot fires breaking out all over the hillsides. And by the time the sun went down, there were nearly 500 homes were destroyed.
The way you describe it, you can hear how the homes themselves became the fuel for the fire that kept it moving. And you wrote about this as a wake-up call for the city of Los Angeles. So what building codes did we get coming out of the Bel-Air fire?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few safety measures, the fire safety measures that were introduced. There was the city basically outlawed untreated wood shingles in high fire risk areas. That wasn't in the city as a whole. It was just in high fire risk areas. They also introduced a brush clearance program, and they did other things as well that weren't really related to building, but they invested in more fire fighting helicopters. They built a new reservoir. They erected new fire stations. So that was, most of what they did were kind of gradual improvements, but it wasn't a sort of wholesale kind of rethinking of the fire risk.
Can we go back even earlier and talk about when a lot of this development first happened in the 1920s into the hillsides? What kind of awareness did people have at that point, the risk of building homes so close to wildlands?
I mean, if you look at the 1920s, which was when a lot of the sort of the wave of development happened in the hillsides, there really wasn't much of an awareness at all of the fire risk. So you had, this was an era when people were more focused on what humans could do rather than the risks. So this was an era when the LA Aqueduct, which was a huge engineering feat, was built, and that paved the way for more than 100,000 people moving into the city each year. You had LA at that point overtaking San Francisco as California's most populated city. So really the focus then was just what humans can do. At the same time, you had engineers building Mulholland Drive, and they would rhapsodize about the human ability to transform nature. I've looked through the adverts for subdivisions at that time. There was a 1923. I've poured over loads of these adverts. A 1923 ad for a new subdivision called Hollywoodland proclaimed the future of Los Angeles is in the hills. And so all over the mountains, they were kind of, using dynamite to blast into granite and using steam shovels to create roads. But there was no discussion in the advertising or even in the sort of boosterish newspaper articles about these subdivisions, about fire risks.
In the 1920s, they're building into the hillside. This is when they built the infamous Hollywood land sign that is now the Hollywood sign. Did they start seeing the potential risk of fires soon after?
I think some people did. I mean, it's really striking to me how fire was a constant backdrop, throughout all the newspaper articles I read. If you look carefully, and they're not in the adverts or the boosterish stories, but in 1923, I think it was about 6 months after construction began on Hollywoodland, LA's fire chief saw that about 600 homes had been destroyed in Berkeley, in Northern California. Yeah, and he actually pushed for an ordinance that would prohibit wood shingles then. But the lumber industry lobbied hard against that and ultimately persuaded LA and California not to act. And even, in 1930, I found this article, it's actually the front page of the LA Times, flames roaring through Santa Monica Hills and a major disaster looms. And about 1,000 men were about 25 miles away in the Santa Monica Mountains or the Malibu coast, battling the flames. And one of the LA County supervisors at the time was just completely freaking out. The LA Times at the time quoted him as saying, if the fire got close into the city of LA, our whole city might go. So you do have these instances where some officials, some people are thinking about fire and the risks of fire. But at the same time, you have this just incredible appetite for building homes. Hillside living had become just this sort of epitome of aspirational LA living. And I think LA at the time was like this symbol of modern forward thinking, it had a modern forward thinking spirit. And so the boosters and the developers, they didn't really, it's kind of ironic, they didn't really grapple with, even though they were forward thinking, they didn't grapple with the risks of what they were doing or really understand what they were doing.
Yeah, what do you think is the big disconnect for people? Because you talk about these beautiful hillsides that they are absolutely gorgeous to live there. But now, fast forward to 2025, I don't think anyone is mistaken about the risk that some of these areas pose to the homeowners.
I just think people are always going to want to live in these kinds of environments because they are attractive. The air is clean, they're lush, and they have rustic vistas. And on some level, I think that just is a human aspiration to want to live there. But some people say development is the problem and we shouldn't build in these areas. We shouldn't rebuild in those areas. On the other hand, there are other people who say it's just really impossible to reverse a century of development, particularly in an era of climate change. I mean, if you look at, say, the Eaton fire in Altadena, that fire went way into the flatlands of Altadena. It wasn't necessarily on the hillsides, although it started there. So there are some people say the focus should be on smarter ways to rebuild and thinking about the best way to fortify homes against fires. One historian of fire that I spoke to, Stephen Pine, he's a professor emeritus at Arizona State University, and he told me California is built to burn. You can live in that landscape, but how you choose to live will affect whether that fire is something that just passes through like a big thunderstorm or whether it's something that destroys whatever you've got. So there is a kind of debate about, even that when we know what the risks are, there's a debate about what we should do. And, we should point out that it's costly. It's hard for the average person who wants to rebuild to build a really fortified home against fire. It's not always easy to do that. So often when people rebuild, they are not doing the creating the most state-of-art solutions to fortify their homes.
As you poured through all of this history, over 100 years of development in Los Angeles, what stuck with you the most?
It's just really the inability to kind of learn from the mistakes. I mean, as I've said, on some level, I think there is just an inability to kind of just always be thinking of the worst case scenario. We we want to just think of the here and now, but just looking back over 100 years, the most striking thing to me is that this wasn't, a problem that just developed in January the 7th, 2025. It wasn't a problem that just started even with the Bel-Air Fire. In the 1920s, even earlier than the 1920s, there were fires. And yet we just have not been able to develop sophisticated ways of confronting that danger and really grappling with the risk. And I think that's becoming more pressing as we face, just accelerated risk with climate change. And, I think more people are thinking about it now, and yet we still haven't really developed the solution for how to live in these areas.
LA Times national correspondent Jenny Jarvie, thank you so much for your time and for all the research that you did on this.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a short break. Stay with us.
It feels good to be here and to be doing something for the community, because once the ash and debris removal has happened to the property, that means the homeowner can come and reclaim it and start thinking about rebuilding. It's just an amazing feeling.
Sandra Molina is a member of the Laborers Union, working with Rebuild SoCal Partnership, helping families rebuild in the aftermath of the devastating wildfires.
I was an addict from 17 to 22. At 22, I found that I was pregnant. My whole life changed.
We are the original union of second chances, and she has demonstrated that she was worthy of that chance. She's rebuilt her life, and now she is rebuilding Altadena.
It feels good to be able to do something for the community and for my kids to see that you could always choose to do the right thing.
To hear Sandra's story, stay tuned for the end of the episode.
During one of the most severe windstorms Southern California experienced in more than a decade, the Palisades and Eaton fires ignited, leaving heartbreaking losses in our communities. Now, as we build back, we're building stronger, cleaner, and more resilient. In communities most vulnerable to dangerous weather conditions and wildfires, Southern California Edison is placing power lines underground, hardening the electric system by installing wires with protective coating, and adding advanced technology to help keep communities safe. So when Southern California faces the next storm, the next most severe event, structures adjacent here at Piper Road, we'll be ready. Learn more at sce.com/disaster recovery.
We are back with Rebuilding LA. I'm Kate Keckle. Now we are going to turn to Char Miller. He's a professor at Pomona College in Claremont, California, where he teaches about environmental history. He's the author of several books on the topic, including Not So Golden State: Sustainability versus the California Dream. He's got some thoughts about rebuilding after a fire. Char Miller, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we just wrapped up this conversation with the LA Times' Jenny Jarvie about the Bel-Air Fire of 1961, which certainly wasn't the first major fire in Los Angeles and not the last. So let's start with this historical lens. What do we need to understand about our area and the propensity to burn?
Well, this place is built to burn in a lot of ways, some of which is ecological. The indigenous people of Southern California, the Tongva and others, utilized fire nonstop to sort of shape what we call an indigenous landscape. That is to say, a manufactured landscape that fire helped them produce for all sorts of goods and services, ritual, social, material, and cultural. So the system that emerged, the ecosystem that emerges, is fire prone already. Then you add to that the glories of droughts, which is really the default here. Rain is the aberrant, drought is the norm. And for those of us who've been living here for a long time know that at least since the 1980s, the entire US Southwest, from El Paso west to LA and then north, has been drying out. And then within that long pattern, there's all of these cyclical ones like we had in the early 2010s and had most recently when the Palisades and Eaton fire blew up. So we've got a natural system that's designed to burn. We've got a climatological shift that is taking place that accelerates this process. And then you do two things, one of which is across time, we have largely tried to suppress fire. That was true for the Spanish missionaries when they came in and were astonished by how much fire the indigenous people of California were putting on the ground and how much they got from it, how much material goods, social good, cultural goods they got from it. So if you want to convert a people and you want them to eat the food that you like and you want them to work the fields so you can get the food you like, you have to take fire out of their hands. As one missionary put it in the 1780s, we have to denaturalize them, literally denaturalize them. So they then had a prohibition about fire. That would be picked up a century later by the emergence of forest fire systems, and particularly the US Forest Service, that made a similar kind of prohibition, outlawed it for all sorts of people, white and indigenous. So we've got a drought system, we have an ecosystem, and then we have this sort of political layer that says all fire is bad. And then we add a fourth layer. The fourth layer is all housing is good housing. So what you heard from Jenny Jarvie, and I'm going to reiterate, is that there's a good growth machine. And that machine says all housing is good, just as all fire is bad. So let's build anywhere and everywhere, including in fire zones. Beginning in the 1920s, we have started to pay, for a century now, pay the cost for that kind of, as you described it, sort of a manifest destiny, in this case, driven by automobiles. Because wherever the car goes, fire follows.
What is unique about Southern California versus Northern California? Do we have distinct challenges here?
Yeah, I think some of the distinct challenges, again, fall to weather. It's drier here. It's drier here in the summer. LA gets 13 inches of rain. The Bay Area gets maybe double that, if not more. So what they grow and how how it's nurtured by rain systems is very different. We've got a lot of people living in Southern California now. There's roughly 25 million people packed inside these valleys. And one of the places we go is outside those valleys. Canyons, ridgelines, mountaintops, whatever you can sit on and build on and get a car up to, people want to live there. So we don't only have pressure of population, but because there's so many people, we have to fight every single fire as if it's the most dangerous thing possible.
Right. I always balk when I see that word wildfire describe what happened in January. You also hear this phrase, urban conflagration. I've also heard WUI, wildland-urban interface fire. What does all that mean?
Well, it essentially means that we've turned wildfires into structure fires. The WUI, the wildland-urban interface, is so interpenetrated by human beings now, there's not an interface. It's literally penetrated. So forget the term. I mean, it's a fun term. It's actually really clunky, and it doesn't capture the reality on the ground. We live virtually anywhere. So fire is going to follow us because we bring it with us. And one of the ways you see that is how many of the more recent fires, the really monstrous ones, were kicked off, generated by Southern Cal Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, and their utility wires. We want electricity. But electricity is fire in a wire.
Yeah, we should add the caveat that we do not know the official cause of the Palisades or the Eaton fire. But as you noted, we are well aware, right? We are 100 years in of development in our area. We very well know about the risk. What is the disconnect? Why do we keep building? You still hear about new subdivisions being approved, despite you hear neighbors sounding the alarm about them being in the wildland or being designed that they only have one way in or one way out.
Right. This is the hardest fight of all because it means it's behavioral. You have to change how zoning commissions operate. You have to change how planning commissions operate. You have to transform city halls, county supervisors, and all of the representatives at the state legislature and sort of shake them. And honestly, there's a lot of us who've been trying to do this for at least the last decade. And it's made no impact whatsoever. And we saw it in January. The mayor and the governor both said, we'll build back immediately. We should never forget what happened in Eaton, but we'll build back. But if you say build back, you actually have already forgotten. We've got a kind of disaster amnesia. And one of the ways to see this is that there were big fires in November and December of 24, and nobody remembers these fires. So if we can't even remember what happened 2 months ago, and we have a politics that said growth is the only mechanism by which we understand a healthy economy, and housing starts are the key to that, then they're just going to keep doing it and hope to God the fire doesn't blow up the next time, which of course it will.
Well, and then we have this factor of the Santa Ana winds, which is an event that we're very familiar with.
Yes.
Here's how fire analyst Zeke Lunder described how the winds behave in an area like the Palisades.
The Palisades that it's named after are these kind of gullies that run right through the community, and those are aligned perfectly with the wind. At the 405 is a low spot in the mountains, and so the wind looks for the low spots, the saddles. And so the wind just rushed over the top there, and then it was perfectly aligned to come into the neighborhoods. And then the neighborhoods, because they're built along the edges of these bluffs, the homes are aligned perfectly with the direction of the Santa Anas. And so the fire just spreads from house to house to house to house with the wind blowing it.
Given the ferocity of the winds that we saw in January, these hurricane force but extremely dry winds that pushed embers miles into the distance, was there really any way to tame this fire once it got started?
No, there was no way to stop the fire once it got started. And the dilemma for us is multiple fold. The first of which is, this is not the first wind-driven fire in the history of Southern California. We have a lot of them. The Eden fire, same winds, but they're coming up and over the San Gabriels. They're not even bothering funneling through Cajon Pass. They just came up and over. So it's a wave in which the wave comes up and over, and then when it crashes, it billows out. So it isn't just that the embers are flying 1 to 2 miles away from where the firefighters thought they were facing the front line of the fire. They're splashing out like a wave does on a beach in any direction possible. So it's impossible to stop. The other reason why it's impossible to stop, and here's an adage that firefighters utilize. At 10 miles an hour of wind speed, they're firefighters. At 30 miles an hour, they're observers. If you get up to 40, there's no aerial support possible, as we saw. You get up to 60, game over. So I don't care how much water they might have had. They couldn't get this fire out because it was just so energized.
We've talked about the fact that California does now have stricter codes for building homes, so these communities will be built back stronger. Does that give you, I see you kind of shaking your head, does that give you solace about the fact that we are rebuilding in these same places?
No. What would give me real solace is if the state and the county and the city decided to put money towards buying out from willing sellers, not, eminent domain, those who don't want to rebuild. They don't have any option at this point. Either their land is an asset and they sell it because that's all they've got left, or their land is an asset and they have other resources and they can get a mortgage and insurance for that mortgage. That may be another issue about insurance. But if you could come into them and say, we'd love to buy your property, do it at a market price as best we can. This conflagration is going to cost conservatively $250 billion. Give me 50. And I could buy and open up buffer zones and other ways by which to slow down the growth, give people more time to escape fires, because they do it in flood alleys. San Antonio, where I lived for 26 years, in 1999 started buying people out of a floodplain because they were tired of trying to rescue them. And people went, holy crap, you're going to buy my house? Yes, please, let's do that. Why don't we do it in the fire zones? We've got a lot of them. We know where they are. It's going to cost money, but doesn't it cost money to put these fires out? How about we be proactive as opposed to reactive all of the time?
So have you had that conversation with government officials?
Yeah, nonstop. And I wrote about it in the LA Times after the Thomas fire in 2017, and sort of banged my little drum as hard as I could. And what you run into is what the mayor and the governor said in January, even as the fires were still burning. We're going to cut corners. We're going to get rid of environmental regulations so that you can build back like for like, and also add 10% to the footprint.
You've written about Monrovia as an example, as an alternative approach to development. Explain that.
Sure. So Monrovia, like Claremont, and a bunch of the sort of foothill communities lining up along the 210, beginning in the early 2000s, and in Claremont, it was in the 1990s, started buying land proactively before it was developed. Claremont has a 2,000, almost 3,000 acre wilderness park that would have sustained 2,000 to 3,000 houses. So add 4 people in there, that's 8,000 something thousand people there. The whole goal was about passive recreation. Turn it into a recreational space, which it does, and Monrovia's and others also have done this. But the benefit is that anybody living south of that park now has a pretty good shot to get out before the fire goes roaring through one of these parklands, because you've got a buffer. I would say that the foothill communities that have done this now recognize that what they did for one reason actually has multiple benefits. And that's the part I really want. So individual towns can do this, but what if the county did it? There's a lot of county land that's unincorporated, that has not been built. What if it could never be built? The county simply pulled it off of any market and said, this stuff isn't going to go. Governments are supposed to protect the health and welfare of their residents. If you build in fire zones, you violated that oath. So let's get smarter.
What about these areas that are already developed into the wildland?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the scariest moments in January was the outbreak of the Sunset Fire.
Yes.
Just in the densest part of Los Angeles. How do we fix that at this point?
There's not a lot you can do. There may be a Band-Aid version of how you can fix this. You can't widen the roads that go up these narrow canyons. And if you can't buy out people from willing sellers, then at least one of the things we might do, and they're going to hate it, but they may love it if there's a fire, which is to build massive water tanks. And you can see them in some parts of LA County. Above Claremont, there's a bunch of them. They really cut into the, quote, aesthetics of the foothills. But if you've got a fire, the helicopter goes, drops down a hose like a mosquito's nose, and sucks it out, and it goes directly to the fire itself. That may be a short-term and short fix to give you some sense of how we can get water without hydrants, which pose their own dilemmas. So, but you can slow it down with the application of certain kinds of materials. This is a real conundrum. And to simply say, as the politicians said, build back quickly is the wrong move, because this is going to take time.
As someone who's been engaged in this issue for so long, who knows California's ecology, who knows the threats that we're facing, I'm curious what it was like for you in January to watch all of it unfold.
It emotionally damaging. And I was 30 miles away. But I know people who lost their houses. And part of the up part of this is that I could walk into a grocery store in Claremont, 30 miles away from Altadena. And everybody was talking about the fire. Everybody knew somebody who was burned out or had family members who escaped or whatever. There was a social network, an emotional social network in which people who were even distant from that space, and I got calls from people all over the country saying, we're watching. And that's an uplifting thing. It doesn't fix the housing. It doesn't save those who died. But it's a way to pivot away from the emotional distress of that moment and recognize that we do have bonds with one another. And those bonds are powerful, even though we don't necessarily see them all the time. And there's a kind of community connectivity there that I was deeply impressed by and helped me get over it. But I still can't go see them. I don't care if they're all cleared out. It is too emotionally upsetting to think about walking down the street in the Palisades that I used to walk down, or in Altadena and communities that I went to restaurants in. We are gonna bear this scar for a very long time.
As Char Miller, he's the W.M. Keck Professor of Environmental Analysis and History at Pomona College. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much for letting me share them.
That's it for Rebuilding LA today. Next week, we are going to talk about the role of climate change and how fires burn in California and how we might try to manage those effects as we build back these two lost communities. Please join us for that. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, and please rate us and leave a review. We want to hear from you. Now a word from our sponsor.
The following is a paid message from Rebuild SoCal Partnership. Sponsor has no editorial oversight.
Homeowners are rebuilding in Altadena. Sandra Molina, a hazmat worker, is rebuilding too. Rebuilding her life. Years ago, addicted to drugs and living on the streets, she ended up pregnant and on welfare. Then joined the Laborers Union Apprenticeship Program. Rebuild SoCal Partnership recently met Sandra at her home at 4 a.m., preparing for work, and followed her to Altadena to meet her hazmat cleanup crew.
Some people have like a 9 to 5. I have a 6 to 2:30. I'm working 12-hour shifts. My kids have their shoes, their school supplies, clothing. We have money in our savings. Well, I became a drug addict at 17. I was homeless in these streets. I was an addict from 17 to 22. At 22, I found that I was pregnant. My whole life changed. I went through the laborers boot camp in August of 2023. I passed it, and on that Friday that I passed it, Monday I had a job. I'm proud of my kids. They've really adapted to my work schedule, which I thought was gonna be very hard for them. That's just my dream goal right now, is to give them a bigger home. So it's definitely been a long journey, and my 3 kids have been with me throughout the journey. Right now we're going to go see my foreman for our daily morning meeting. And then I get to my job site, I start talking to my crew, and we start talking about any safety hazards, and we get suited and we go in there and we do our thing. Watch out for the machine's swing radius and between the wall, and just be aware and alert at all times. Wear your PPE, clean your mask, and wear your gloves and the latex over, safety glasses. It feels good to be here and to be doing something for the community, because once the ash and debris removal has happened to the property, that means the homeowner can come and reclaim it and start thinking about rebuilding. It's just an amazing feeling. And then there's 2 people inside, so that's where we go in with our hand tools, shovels, rakes. We're removing ash and debris, load it into the trucks, get it out, and turn in our properties.
Jaime Hauragi, a representative of Anvil Builders, Sandra's employer, was happy to talk about the qualities she brought to her work.
Sandra's been incredible, right, to say the least. She brings grit, teamwork, determination, all the qualities that we're looking for in an individual to help us run such a complex project like this one.
The hazmat class was very important to us because it let us know what we were going to be facing out in the field. So they taught us how to suit up, to wear the APR half face with the clean filters to filter out any contaminants.
Laborers Union leader John Preciado met Sandra at work to offer his support.
We in Southern California invest a tremendous amount of time and resources into our apprenticeship program, and we build skilled and trained workers. We're extremely proud of Sandra and the efforts that we've put into her, but also what she's put into herself. We are the original union of second chances, and she has demonstrated that she was worthy of that chance. She's rebuilt her life, and now she is rebuilding Altadena.
I feel like the union helped me rebuild my life. It feels good to be able to do something for the community and for my kids to see that You could always choose to do the right thing.
After work, her daughter Abigail was the first to meet her as she walked in the door.
My mom works very hard so I can have a better life. The thing that I love about my mom is that she's very caring, and even though she comes home late, she still tries to buy me and my brothers whatever we want because she loves us very much.
When I felt like everything was gonna swallow me, like the ground, I would look over to them and I'd be like, I can't give up. I have 3 people depending on me. I have to keep going. I want to be able to get a home for me to leave for my children to inherit.
They get up at 4 a.m., they work till 6 p.m., usually 7 days a week. Let's be thankful that these workers are here, building careers and helping the community at the same time.
Being out here has helped me rebuild my life, and in a sense, I have also helped rebuild homeowners' life. So definitely, I know that I'm gonna be driving around here and I'm gonna tell my daughter, I worked on this property and this property and this property, and look how it looks now. So it feels good.
Rebuilding LA is hosted by and reported on by me, Kate Cagle. Our senior producer and showrunner is Megan Larson. Our associate producers are Jordan Patterson and Megan Botel. Our video director is Julia McCabe, our director of post-production is Patrick Stewart, and our senior sound recording engineer is Nick Norton, with audio engineering help from David Iskandarian and motion graphics by Dougal Henkin. Our video editor is Michael Ray. Ben Church is our senior coordinating producer, and Anne-Marie Hauser is our production manager. Our podcast marketing manager is Bryn Jura, and our product marketing director is Becca Dorman. Our general counsel at the LA Times is Jeff Glasser. Special thanks to President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argenteri, and the Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. And one final thank you to all the residents of Altadena and the Pacific Palisades for sharing your stories with us. Rebuilding LA is co-created by LA Times Studios President Anna Magzanian and executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson.